ਵੈਲਕਮ ਟੂ ਦਿਸ ਐਪੀਸੋਡ ਆਫ ਦ ਹਰਪ੍ਰੀਤ ਸਿੰਘ ਸ਼ੋ। ਇੱਕ ਅਸੀਂ ਸੀਰੀਜ਼ ਸ਼ੁਰੂ ਕੀਤੀ ਹੈ ਜਿਸ ਦੀ ਬਹੁਤ ਜ਼ਿਆਦਾ ਮਹੱਤਤਾ ਹੈ ਸਾਡੇ ਆਪਣੇ ਭਾਈਚਾਰੇ ਦੇ ਵਿੱਚ। 100th ਐਨੀਵਰਸਰੀ ਅਸੀਂ ਮਨਾ ਰਹੇ ਹਾਂ ਫਸਟ ਵਰਲਡ ਵਾਰ ਦੀ, ਕਿਉਂਕਿ 1914 ਦੇ ਵਿੱਚ ਇਹ ਜੰਗ ਸ਼ੁਰੂ ਹੋਈ ਸੀ। 2014 ਵਿੱਚ ਸ਼ਰਧਾਂਜਲੀਆਂ ਅਰਪਣ ਕੀਤੀਆਂ ਜਾ ਰਹੀਆਂ ਨੇ ਉਹਨਾਂ ਫੌਜੀਆਂ ਨੂੰ ਜਿਨ੍ਹਾਂ ਦੀ ਬਦੌਲਤ ਅੱਜ ਡੈਮੋਕ੍ਰੇਸੀ ਦੁਨੀਆ 'ਚ ਵੇਖੀ ਜਾ ਰਹੀ ਹੈ। ਪਿਛਲੇ ਹਫ਼ਤੇ ਜੋ ਅਸੀਂ ਗੱਲਬਾਤ ਕੀਤੀ ਸੀ ਉਸ ਵਿੱਚ ਮੇਰਾ ਸਾਥ ਦਿੱਤਾ ਸੀ ਸਟੀਵਨ ਪੁਰੇਵਾਲ ਅਤੇ ਕਰਨਲ ਦਰਸ਼ਨ ਸਿੰਘ ਸਿੱਧੂ ਨੇ। ਲਾਸਟ ਟਾਈਮ ਜਿੱਥੇ ਅਸੀਂ ਛੱਡਿਆ ਸੀ ਬੈਟਲ ਆਫ ਸਾਰਾਗੜੀ 1897 ਤੱਕ ਅਸੀਂ ਪਹੁੰਚ ਗਏ ਸੀ ਕਿ ਜੋ ਵੈਲਰ ਦਿਖਾਇਆ ਗਿਆ, ਜੋ ਬਹਾਦਰੀ ਦਿਖਾਈ ਗਈ, ਉਸ ਤੋਂ ਬ੍ਰਿਟਿਸ਼ ਰਾਜ ਇੰਨਾ ਖੁਸ਼ ਹੋਇਆ ਕਿ ਵਿਕਟੋਰੀਆ ਕ੍ਰਾਸ ਨਾਲ ਸਨਮਾਨਿਤ ਕੀਤਾ ਗਿਆ। ਇਸ ਚੀਜ਼ ਦਾ ਕੀ ਇੰਪੈਕਟ ਪੈ ਰਿਹਾ ਸੀ ਓਵਰਆਲ, ਕਿਉਂਕਿ ਇੱਕ ਪਾਸੇ ਇੱਕ ਵੱਖਰੀ ਸੋਚ ਚੱਲ ਰਹੀ ਸੀ, ਪਰ ਸਿੱਖ ਬਹਾਦਰ ਫੌਜੀਆਂ ਦੀ ਜੋ ਇਹ ਕਾਰਨਾਮੇ ਸੀ ਇਹ ਦੁਨੀਆ ਭਰ ਦੇ ਵਿੱਚ ਇਸ ਦੀ ਚਰਚਾ ਚੱਲ ਰਹੀ ਸੀ। ਈਵਨ ਇੰਗਲੈਂਡ ਵਿੱਚ ਵੀ ਇਸ ਦੇ ਬਾਰੇ ਡਿਸਕਸ਼ਨ ਸ਼ੁਰੂ ਹੋਈਆਂ ਸੀ। ਕੀ ਇਸ ਦਾ ਇੰਪੈਕਟ ਪਿਆ, ਕੀ ਰੈਮੀਫਿਕੇਸ਼ਨਸ ਹੋਈਆਂ ਤੇ ਕਿਵੇਂ ਇਹ ਲੀਡ ਕਰਦਾ ਹੈ ਟੂਵਰਡਸ ਦ ਫਸਟ ਵਰਲਡ ਵਾਰ। ਆਓ ਇਸੇ ਸੰਬੰਧ ਵਿੱਚ ਅੱਜ ਮੁੜ ਤੋਂ ਤੁਹਾਨੂੰ ਜੋੜਦੇ ਹਾਂ ਤੇ ਜਾਣਕਾਰੀ ਲੈਣੇ ਆਏ ਹੋਏ ਮਹਿਮਾਨ Colonel Darshan Singh Sidhu ਅਤੇ Stephen Puriwal ਤੋਂ। Welcome to the program. Thank you. So last time while we were talking, Stephen, Colonel Sidhu had told us about the valor shown by the 21 Sikh soldiers at the post in Saragadi. Now, after this valor, it was being talked, it was a kind of a talk of the world, and in the British Raj also this was being talked that how valor, how brave are these Sikh soldiers, and the valor is to be talked about. So what impact did it have on the relationship between the Britishers and the Sikh soldiers?
There was a huge impact. The fact that these Indian soldiers, these Punjabi soldiers, a regiment from originally raised in Jalandhar, was able to stand and not turn their back on the crown, turn their back on the flag, because they were given a chance to surrender and join the Pathans, and they wouldn't be killed. But they elected to fight to the death. The fact that they elected to fight to the death spoke about their courage, but also their nobility. The fact that they'd taken an oath to the crown, that those professional soldiers, they didn't break that oath. To the British, that meant a huge, it was a game changer. We'd like to use the word game changer. It was a game changer. Here were a group of people that didn't break their word. Now, as the community that was comprising that regiment, as I mentioned, is raised in Jalandhar. These were rural Punjabis, Jat Sikh stock. It was a 100% Jat Sikh regiment. Now, in my view, as a Jat, that the tradition of honor, the tradition of a word, it carries a lot of weight. Absolutely. Our word is our bond.
And that was witnessed in this battle.
Yes, and that was absolutely witnessed. It was the acid test.
So many people talk about that, no, the Britishers were using them, but this, do you think that they were being used?
Well,
what kind of relationship they had?
Well, you have to remember there's partisan thoughts about the service of the Punjabis especially for the British. There's a camp that will say that we were fighting for the crown against India's aspirations for freedom. There's a camp on the other side that will say, well, these were Punjabi soldiers that were professionals and they were doing a job. More so, I would add that the Punjabis were in a situation where they're the beneficiaries of this huge enterprise, the British Empire. The British Empire was paying a lot of attention to them. They were developing new jobs, they were investing in Punjab, they were opening up the new canal colonies, land grants were being given to the rural people. So for them as a community, they had the security of a job in the professional army that paid a pension. So in your mindset in India, there is no welfare safety net. To have a pension was a huge deal. But also as an agrarian caste, we were being granted this new land that was being opened up by the British. They built new canals, there were new fertile plains, and that land was granted to military families.
And they had the opportunity to do farming.
Yes, and so now they had acreage. Hundreds of acres were given as grants, jagirs. And so this one particular community was the beneficiary of a huge administration, a British administration. And I would add that the military spending of the Indian government was 50% of the entire Indian budget at that time. And if 50% was military, the majority of the military budget was being spent in Punjab. Can you imagine today,
so
if the government was spending so much money in one area, there would be a lot of affluence.
So that is why their relationships were strengthening.
Yes, so the Sikhs, saw that, we're getting a lot of attention. And the British said, well, why not? This one group,
they are the ones who stood for us,
who will stand, don't turn their backs when the acid test came.
Kan sab loyalty ਦੀ ਜਦੋਂ ਅਸੀਂ ਗੱਲ ਕਰਨੇ ਇੱਜ਼ਤ ਦੀ ਗੱਲ ਕਰਨੇ ਇੱਕ ਫੌਜੀ ਦੀ ਜ਼ਿੰਦਗੀ ਦੇ ਵਿੱਚ loyalty ਤੇ ਇੱਜ਼ਤ ਦੀ ਕੀ ਮਾਇਨੇ ਹੁੰਦੇ ਨੇ?
ਦੇਖੋ ਜੀ, we are supposed to loyal to our commander
ਜੀ,
when we take oath, ਜਦੋਂ ਅਸੀਂ ਕਸਮ ਚੱਕਦੇ ਹਾਂ ਲੜਾਈ ਜਾਣ ਤੋਂ ਪਹਿਲਾਂ ਟ੍ਰੇਨਿੰਗ ਤੋਂ ਮਗਰੋਂ ਸਾਨੂੰ ਕਸਮ ਲੈਣੀ ਪੈਂਦੀ ਹੈ ਕਿ ਮੈਂ ਦੇਸ਼ ਦੀ ਖਾਤਰ
ਜੀ
ਸਭ ਕੁਝ ਤਿਆਗ ਦਿਆਂਗਾ,
ਠੀਕ ਹੈ,
ਆਪਣੇ ਆਪ ਨੂੰ ਸੈਕਰੀਫਾਈਸ ਕਰ ਦਿਆਂਗਾ। ਤੇ ਉਹ ਲਾਇਲਟੀ ਆਉਂਦੀ ਹੈ ਪਹਿਲਾਂ ਦੇਸ਼ ਦੀ, ਫਿਰ ਤੁਹਾਡੇ ਕਮਾਂਡਰ ਦੀ
ਜੀ, ਫਿਰ
ਤੁਹਾਡੇ ਕਾਮਰੇਡ ਦੀ।
ਠੀਕ,
ਇਹ ਨਹੀਂ ਹੈ ਕਿ ਤੁਹਾਡੇ ਕਾਮਰੇਡ ਦੇ ਨਾਲ ਤੁਸੀਂ ਦਗਾ ਕਰ ਸਕਦੇ ਹੋ। ਤੁਸੀਂ ਕੰਧੇ ਨਾਲ ਕੰਧਾ ਜੋੜ ਕੇ,
ਠੀਕ, ਜਿਵੇਂ
ਅਸੀਂ ਗੋਰਿਆਂ ਦੇ ਨਾਲ ਕੰਧੇ ਨਾਲ ਕੰਧਾ ਜੋੜ ਕੇ ਲੜਾਈ ਕੀਤੀ ਹੈ, ਠੀਕ ਹੈ ਨਾ। ਉਹ ਵੀ ਹੈਰਾਨ ਸੀ ਵੀ ਇਹ ਲੋਕ ਕਿਵੇਂ ਬਿਨਾਂ ਸੁੱਤੇ ਹੀ ਲੱਗੇ ਰਹਿੰਦੇ, ਸਵੇਰੇ ਸ਼ਾਮ ਗੋਲੀ ਚੱਲਦੀ ਹੈ, ਇਹਨਾਂ ਨੂੰ ਕਿਸੇ ਚੀਜ਼ ਦਾ ਫਿਕਰ ਨਹੀਂ ਹੈ, ਨਹਾਤੇ ਆ ਧੋਤੇ ਆ ਕਿ ਨਹੀਂ, ਮੋਰਚਿਆਂ 'ਚ ਬੈਠੇ ਉੱਥੇ ਖਾਈ ਜਾਂਦੇ, ਉੱਥੇ ਪੀ ਜਾਂਦੇ, ਸਾਰਾ ਕੁਝ ਲੜਾਈ ਕਰੀ ਜਾਂਦੇ, ਠੀਕ ਹੈ ਨਾ। ਉਸੇ ਸਾਨੂੰ ਇਹ ਹੈ ਵੀ ਦੇਖਣ ਵਾਲਾ, ਉੱਪਰ ਦੇਖਣ ਵਾਲਾ ਕੋਈ ਨਾ ਕੋਈ ਕਮਾਂਡਰ ਅੱਛਾ ਹੋਣਾ ਚਾਹੀਦਾ।
ਠੀਕ,
if a good commander is there, then the Sikhs can fight for war anywhere, as it has been explained by various journals, that if the Sikhs are there with me, I will not have any defeat in the war.
ਐਂਡ ਸਿੱਖਾਂ ਦੀ ਜਿਹੜੀ ਜਿਸ ਤਰ੍ਹਾਂ ਅਸੀਂ ਗੱਲ ਕਰਦੇ ਹਾਂ, ਤੁਸੀਂ ਜਨਰਲ ਖਾਨ ਦੀ ਵੀ ਗੱਲ ਕੀਤੀ ਸੀ, ਉਹਨਾਂ ਨੇ ਵੀ ਆਪਣੀ ਕਿਤਾਬ ਵਿੱਚ ਜੋ ਲਿਖਿਆ ਉਹ ਸਾਨੂੰ ਜ਼ਰੂਰ ਦੱਸੋ।
ਜਨਰਲ ਮਕੀਮ ਖਾਨ ਪਾਕਿਸਤਾਨ, ਉਹਨਾਂ ਨੇ ਦੱਸਿਆ ਹੈ ਕਿ ਜਿੰਨੇ ਵੀ ਫਰੋਸ਼ੀਅਸ ਲੁਕਿੰਗ ਸਰਦਾਰ ਜੀ, ਅਸੀਂ ਹੈਰਾਨ ਹੋ ਗਏ ਜਦੋਂ ਇਹਨਾਂ ਨੇ ਸਾਡੇ ਤੇ ਅਟੈਕ ਕੀਤਾ। ਕੋਈ ਇਸ ਤਰੀਕੇ ਨਾਲ ਆਏ, ਬਿਜਲੀ ਵਾਂਗੂ ਆਏ ਤੇ ਬਿਜਲੀ ਵਾਂਗੂ ਵਾਪਸ ਚਲੇ ਗਏ, ਸਾਡੇ ਸਾਰੇ ਬੰਦਿਆਂ ਨੂੰ ਖਤਮ ਕਰ ਗਏ। ਸਿਮਿਲਰਲੀ ਇਹ ਚੀਜ਼ ਜਿਹੜੀ ਹੈ ਇੱਕ ਮੇਜਰ ਨੇ ਉੱਥੇ ਇਹਨਾਂ ਨੇ ਮਕੀਮ ਖਾਨ ਨੇ ਕਿਹਾ ਹੈ 71 ਆਪਰੇਸ਼ਨ ਜੀ, ਉਦੋਂ ਮੈਂ ਐਜ਼ ਅ ਮੇਜਰ ਸੀ ਜੀ, ਤੇ ਉਦੋਂ ਦੇਖਿਆ ਵੀ ਇਹਨੇ ਦੱਸਿਆ ਵੀ ਕਿਉਂ ਅਸੀਂ ਹਾਰ ਗਏ ਇੱਥੇ, ਕਿਉਂਕਿ ਸਾਡੇ ਸਾਹਮਣੇ ਸਿੱਖਾਂ ਦੀ ਪਲਟਨ ਸੀ।
ਸੋ ਕਬੂਲ ਕਰਦੇ ਨੇ ਕਿ ਸਿੱਖਾਂ ਦੀ ਬਹਾਦਰੀ ਜਿਹੜੀ ਸੀ ਉਹਦੇ ਕਾਰਨ ਉਹ ਹਾਰੇ।
ਜੇ ਸਿੱਖਾਂ ਦੀ ਪਲਟਨ ਨਾ ਹੁੰਦੀ ਤੇ ਅਸੀਂ ਕਿਸੇ ਨੂੰ ਸਾਰਿਆਂ ਨੂੰ ਜਿੱਤ ਸਕਦੇ ਸੀ।
Thank you, sir. Shukriya. Lene, ek choti ji break. We'll come back. And like you were mentioning, from 1897 onwards, the bonding between the Britishers and the Sikh soldiers was strengthening. And the way you told us that they were being given jagirs and they were loyal and they could depend upon them. And that was one of the reasons that the Britishers stood along with the Sikh soldiers. Now, this was, that strengthening of relationship was also leading to, when we talk about the First World War in 1914. So those periods, about 17 years of period, that was a time when the Sikhs were absolutely loyal. And when the call from Britain came for jumping into the war, the Sikh soldiers didn't look back. We'll talk about this, that what has been the contribution of the Sikh soldiers in the First World War after this small break.
ਕਾਰ ਐਕਸੀਡੈਂਟ ਵਿੱਚ ਲੱਗੀਆਂ ਸੱਟਾਂ ਤਾਂ ਜ਼ਿੰਦਗੀ ਤਬਾਹ ਕਰ ਸਕਦੀਆਂ। ਫਿਰ ਵੀ ਪਤਾ ਨਹੀਂ ਕਿਉਂ ਤੁਸੀਂ ਸਮਝਦੇ ਆ ਕਿ ਬਗੈਰ ਕਿਸੇ ਵਕੀਲ ਤੋਂ ਘਰ ਦੇ ਖਰਚੇ ਵੀ ਸੰਭਾਲ ਲਓਗੇ, ਸੱਟਾਂ ਦਾ ਇਲਾਜ ਵੀ ਕਰਾ ਲਓਗੇ ਤੇ ICBC ਤੋਂ ਆਪਣੇ ਹੱਕ ਦੇ ਪੈਸੇ ਵੀ ਲੈ ਲਓਗੇ। ਮੇਰੀ ਗੱਲ ਸੁਣੋ, ਕਾਰ ਐਕਸੀਡੈਂਟ ਤੋਂ ਬਾਅਦ ਕਈ ਸਵਾਲ ਉੱਠਦੇ ਆ, ਉਹਨਾਂ ਸਵਾਲਾਂ ਦਾ ਜਵਾਬ ਕੌਣ ਦੇਊਗਾ? ਧਾਮੀ ਨਾਰੰਗ ਐਂਡ ਕੰਪਨੀ। ਅੱਜ ਹੀ ਫੋਨ ਕਰੋ 604-864-6131।
Once again, welcome back to the program. ਇੱਕ ਬਹੁਤ ਹੀ ਇੰਟਰਸਟਿੰਗ ਟੌਪਿਕ ਦੇ ਉੱਤੇ ਅਸੀਂ ਤੁਹਾਡੇ ਨਾਲ ਸਾਂਝ ਪਾ ਰਹੇ ਹਾਂ। ਫਰਸਟ ਵਰਲਡ ਵਾਰ ਵਿੱਚ ਤੇ ਉਸ ਤੋਂ ਪਹਿਲਾਂ ਜੋ ਸਿੱਖਾਂ ਦੀ ਕੰਟਰੀਬਿਊਸ਼ਨ ਰਹੀ, ਜਿਹੜੇ ਫੌਜੀ ਕਿਸ ਤਰੀਕੇ ਨਾਲ ਬਹਾਦਰੀ ਦਾ ਉਹਨਾਂ ਨੇ ਜੋ ਸੀ ਮੁਜੱਸਮਾ ਉਹ ਸਾਹਮਣੇ ਦਿਖਾਇਆ ਕਿ ਕਿਸ ਤਰੀਕੇ ਨਾਲ ਉਹ ਡਰਦੇ ਨਹੀਂ ਸੀ, ਹਮੇਸ਼ਾ ਹੀ ਉਹ ਲਾਇਲਟੀ ਅਤੇ ਇੱਜ਼ਤ ਦੀ ਗੱਲ ਕਰਿਆ ਕਰਦੇ ਸੀ ਤੇ ਉਸ ਦੇ ਫਲਸਰੂਪ ਉਹਨਾਂ ਨੂੰ ਬ੍ਰਿਟਿਸ਼ ਸਰਕਾਰ ਨੇ ਉਸ ਸਮੇਂ ਬਹੁਤ ਸਾਰੇ ਅਵਾਰਡਸ ਨਾਲ ਵੀ ਤੇ ਹੋਰ ਬੈਨੀਫਿਟਸ ਨਾਲ ਨਿਵਾਜ਼ਿਆ। 1914 ਦੇ ਵਿੱਚ ਜਦੋਂ ਜੰਗ ਦੀ ਪੁਕਾਰ ਕੀਤੀ ਗਈ ਉਸ ਸਮੇਂ ਕਿਵੇਂ ਇਹ ਫੌਜੀਆਂ ਨੇ ਜਾ ਕੇ ਆਪਣਾ ਯੋਗਦਾਨ ਪਾਇਆ ਔਰ ਉਸੇ ਸੰਬੰਧ ਵਿੱਚ ਗੱਲਬਾਤ ਕਰਦੇ ਹਾਂ ਸਟੀਵਨ ਪੁਰੇਵਾਲ ਅਤੇ ਕਰਨਲ ਦਰਸ਼ਨ ਸਿੰਘ ਸਿੱਧੂ ਨਾਲ. Yes, Stephen. So 1914, when the call came, before that only, the situation was becoming precarious, and the way in the Europe things were happening, and definitely the British Empire needed some support, so they banked upon the Sikh soldiers. Now, what kind of appeal at that time was made, and what was the response from the Sikh soldiers?
Well, actually, they didn't bank upon the Sikhs. It was a necessity.
Right.
Germany had been rising as a power in Europe for 10-15 years,
Right.
and though that particular summer no one was alert that it was going to break out then, the feeling was Germany wanted to usurp some of the other imperial powers. They were
Right.
jealous of Britain's holdings, Britain's empire, and they felt that they were lagging.
Right.
So they wanted to be the next superpower in Europe.
Okay.
So they'd been building up this military machine for many years. Britain's supremacy really lay in its naval capabilities. What they had done was they hadn't been focusing on their infantry because they didn't build up the infantry because they'd used the British Indian Army for various campaigns during the Victorian era.
Right.
So starting straight after 1857, with the first campaign is in China. It's in
Right.
1860. Ludhiana Sikh regiment is taken out to Peking.
Okay.
We're in China. Straight after that, in 1867, we fight in East Africa, so actually Abyssinia, which is Ethiopia.
Yeah.
We fight there. So we're starting to move across the globe.
Right.
Then after that, we're actually in the 70s, we're in Europe, we're in Malta and Cyprus.
Right.
And then 1882 is I think, a pivotal point in our history with the British, is the Suez Canal.
Right.
We saved the Suez Canal for the British. It's the artery, the lifeline to India, so they saw it as being very, very important, very strategic, and it was under threat from local forces,
Right.
and the Egyptians wanted to basically throw the Brits out. And
Right.
so
But
forth.
is all this documented, the
Oh, yes.
contribution of the Sikh soldiers?
Oh
there?
yes, absolutely it is. It's just not popularized, it's
Right.
documented.
Okay.
And I have all the newspapers of the time that can actually show you the coverage that
Right.
we were getting in the paper. And it's fantastic coverage. We're making front page,
Okay.
front page news. We're on headline news in Britain.
Right.
And there'll be pictures of Sardars on front covers of newspapers
Wow.
in 1882.
Okay.
So it was well known at the time. So from that point, you have this campaigns through Egypt.
Right.
You're back in China. So what had happened was, for that 50 years, they were relying on the British Indian Army to do their international
Right.
campaigns. Everything from what is today Ghana all the way to Peking
Right.
was actually campaigned. The battles were Punjabi regiment battles.
Right.
So they didn't focus on the infantry because they weren't using the infantry.
Right.
In the European mainland, didn't have a battle.
Right.
Since 1815, Waterloo was the last battle.
Right.
Last time there was warfare on the European mainland. There was a Crimea in 1854,
Right.
but that was in the Western Europe.
Right.
So they didn't need to fight with infantry in the European mainland.
Right.
So when the summer of 1914 comes and war breaks out, their infantry is not up to it.
Right.
Britain has 100,000 soldiers, 125,000 including the reserves, and Germany has nearly 1 million infantry.
Wow.
So they know when war breaks out, we're in trouble here. But yet, on August 4th, when they declare war, the plan was still not to necessarily use the Indians because they were afraid of the Indians becoming so confident that they could kill white people, that the illusion of white supremacy
Oh.
would be eroded.
Okay.
So there was a color bar.
Right.
So this actually happened in 1900. There was a campaign by the South Africans,
Right.
the Boer War,
Yeah,
from
Boer War.
1899 to 1902.
Right.
The Indian soldiers, even though they'd already fought in Africa, but when the enemy was white, so in all these previous cases, the enemy of the crown was always non-white. It was either
Right.
Africans,
Yeah.
Chinese, Afghans, whoever it was, they were non-white. But as soon as the enemy was white, they didn't want the Indian soldiers killing white men.
Right.
So they had a color bar.
Right.
So in 1899 to 1902, the Boer War, in which the Canadians actually factored, the Canadians were present in that war, the Indian soldiers were there on the ground, they were called aide-de-camp. They were
Okay.
assistants to Lord Roberts.
Right.
But they weren't allowed to pick up their guns and rifles and lances and actually attack white people. So this actually was weighing down on the Punjabi soldier. It's a
Oh
a
yeah,
slight. It's
to
an
be in the
insult.
battle that
Yeah,
you're not being allowed to go and fight. you know?
And so the original plan when war breaks out on August 4th is for the Indians to travel to the Suez Canal
Okay.
to relieve the British battalions that are there, so the British battalions can then go off to France.
Right.
And we would be stationed there and protect the Suez.
Okay.
But what happens is the first 3 weeks of the war goes so badly for the Brits.
Right.
100,000 soldiers against the Germans. You know, now it's after war breaks out, they've got more enlistment. They have 2 million men.
Right.
They're being demolished.
So it's a very, again, a precarious situation which is developing, and I would like to discuss about this in our next episode as to what continues from here, how the Indian soldiers, the Sikh soldiers are then brought forward, and also Colonel ਸਾਹਿਬ ਜਦੋਂ ਅਸੀਂ ਜੰਗ ਵਿੱਚ ਜਾਂਦੇ ਹਾਂ ਇੱਕ ਫੌਜੀ ਦੀ ਕੀ ਮਨੋਦਸ਼ਾ ਹੁੰਦੀ ਹੈ, ਕੀ ਮਾਈਂਡਸੈਟ ਹੁੰਦਾ ਹੈ, ਕਿਹੜੀ ਚੀਜ਼ ਉੱਤੇ ਭਾਰੂ ਹੁੰਦੀ ਹੈ, ਜਿਸ ਤਰ੍ਹਾਂ ਅਸੀਂ ਪਹਿਲਾਂ ਵੀ ਗੱਲ ਕੀਤੀ ਸੀ 1897 ਜਦੋਂ ਬੈਟਲ ਆਫ ਸਾਰਾਗੜੀ ਹੋਈ ਸੀ ਕਿਸ ਤਰੀਕੇ ਨਾਲ ਬਹਾਦਰੀ ਵਿਖਾਈ ਗਈ 21 ਸਿੱਖ ਫੌਜੀਆਂ ਵੱਲੋਂ ਜੰਗ ਦੇ ਵਿੱਚ ਕਿਹੋ ਜਿਹਾ ਮਾਹੌਲ ਹੁੰਦਾ ਹੈ, ਅਗਲੇ ਐਪੀਸੋਡ ਵਿੱਚ ਤੁਹਾਡੇ ਨਾਲ ਗੱਲਬਾਤ ਕਰਾਂਗੇ। ਤੁਹਾਡਾ ਦੋਨਾਂ ਦਾ ਇੱਥੇ ਆਉਣ ਲਈ ਧੰਨਵਾਦ। ਥੈਂਕ ਯੂ ਵੈਰੀ ਮਚ ਫॉर योर टाइम।